The Betrayal, a poem for my father. This man is seriously ill, the doctor had said a week before, calling for a wheelchair. It was after they rang me to come down and persuade you to go in. Condemned to remember your eyes as they met mine in that moment before they wheeled you away. It was one of my final tasks to persuade you to go in. A Judas chosen not by apostles, but by others more broken, and I was in part relieved when they wheeled you from me, down that corridor confused without a backward glance. And when I had done it, I cried out on the road, hitching a lift to Galway, and away from the trouble of your cantankerous old age. And rage, too, at all that had in recent years befallen you. All week I waited to visit you, but when I called you had been moved to where those dying too slowly were sent, a poor house no longer known by that name, but in the liberated era of Lamass given a saint's name. St. Joseph's was he Christ's father, patron saint of the worker, the mad choice of some pietistic politician. You never cared, nor did you speak too much. You had broken in attendance glasses, the holy nurse told me, when you were admitted. Your father is a very difficult man, and as you must know, social welfare is slow, and if you would pay for the glasses I would appreciate it. It was 1964, just after optical benefit was rejected by De Valera for poorer classes in his republic, who could not afford, as he did, to travel to Zurich for their regular tests and their rimless glasses. It was decades earlier you had brought me to see him, pass through Newmarket and Fergus as the brass and reed band struck up, cheeks red and distended to the point where a child's wonder was as to whether they would burst as they blew their trombones. The Sacred Heart procession and De Valera, you told me, were the only occasions when their instruments were taken from the rusting galvanized shed where they stored them, in anticipation of the requirements of church and state. Long before that you had slept in ditches and dugouts, prayed in terror at ambushes with others who later debated whether De Valera was lucky or brilliant in getting the British to remember that he was an American. And that debate had not lasted long in concentration camps in Newbridge and the Curragh, where mattresses were burned as the Gombeans decided that the new state was a good thing even for business. In the dining room of St. Joseph's the potatoes were left in the middle of the table, in a dish towards which you and many other republicans stretched feeble hands that shook. Your eyes were bent as you peeled with the long thumbnail I had often watched scrape a pattern on the leather you had toughened for our shoes. Your eyes when you looked at me were 1,000 miles away, now totally broken, unlike those times even of rejection, when you went at 60 for jobs you never got, too frail to load vans or manage the demands of selling. And I remember when you came back to me, your regular companion of such occasions, and said they think that I'm too old for the job. I said I was 58, but they knew that I was past 60. A body ready for transportation, fit only for a coffin that made you too awkward for death at home. The shame of a coffin exit through a window sent you here, where my mother told me you asked only for her to place her cool hand under your neck. And I was there when they asked, would they give you a Republican funeral in that month when you died between the end of the first programme for economics expansion and the second. I look at your photo now, taken in the beginning of bad days with your surviving mates in Limerick. Your face haunts me as do these memories, and all these things have been scraped in my heart, and I can never hope to forget what was, after all, a betrayal. Now, I wrote the poem, I suppose, over such a long period. I began it in bits and scraps, maybe 15 years before I finished it, about 1990. And I remember distinctly the moment I finished it. I think I was approaching somewhere like Selbridge, curiously, in the train on my way to Dublin. I remember being very moved doing it because it was done then. And in a curious way then, that poem having been done, I moved on to others, and it was as if a block had been removed. But the poem, of course, is one which is almost totally biographical. There are some slight changes in it, and it's a theme that would recur in other writing. I noticed later when I look back sometimes at what I have written, and it's about the relationships between fathers and sons. In fact, in my next volume of poems, which will be the fourth volume, there's likely to be an examination of that theme. I know I have lines like, it is the fate of sons to become their fathers, and so on. And it is an interesting theme in literature that, in fact, at certain stages of people's lives, and girls too, about becoming their mothers, and sons becoming their fathers. And then there are, of course, very subtle and beautiful reflections on that, like, for example, in Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, and so on.
Is that something you worry about?
No, I think I'm past it now. I'm on to a new territory, I think, a bit. But it is interesting that if I was redoing all of the work again, I probably, now that I have, so many poems in the volumes, that I would recombine them probably in a different way. But then I don't know, that mightn't work either. That's really an attempt almost to suggest a progression that would itself be arbitrary. Like, I think that the poem I wrote about Peter Michaels is one of my own favourites. But you see, I'm not so sure now will people ever relate to it, because Peter Michael Keelan's in front of the hospital is one of the places that's a very significant location and a point in my life. I was a very young lecturer, you see, and the hospital across from Peter Michael Keelan's, in the period in which I wrote that poem, which is recollecting my first memories of the 60s, is one in which you would have children being born in the maternity. You would have people waiting to leave from the morgue. You had miscellaneous injuries and so forth. And you had Connemara people, Galway people, and you had music and everything. So it was like a kind of a play as the whole thing happened during the day. There would be music and concertinas and everything, and then at around 4:30 someone would give the widow or whatever a little dig in the ribs, and it was time to start crying, because it was a funeral after all. And